I want to welcome everyone in the audience today and all of our great panelists. This is such a timely event as we see all kind of new athletes empowerment in the last weeks, and NFT are blowing up on my Twitter feed. I'm really interested on both subjects today, as I feel we might see a shift for a more equal distribution between athletes from all caliber, and I wish, if the big winner won't be those business savvy, mid-low tier athletes, or better, all of the women out there pushing sports to higher grounds. Now it's time for tip-off. I'm your host, Dominique Soucy, and founder of PürInstinct, the world's most athletic sport, and I will be responsible of the audience Q&A today. Please make sure you interact in the chat and ask direct questions to the panel. You can also upvote questions, so I will make sure we cover up the top question on the Q&A board. Now, let me pass the mic, the ball, the puck to our moderator today, Bianca Shea.
Thanks, Dom. As Dom said, I'm Bianca Shea, and I'm thrilled to be moderating today. I, would just love to piggyback off of what Dom started with in terms of, what do you guys think? Who will benefit most from these NFT? Will it be your LeBrons? Will it be those power star athletes? Or will it be those individuals that typically we may qualify as mid-tier or even, women athletes who are now going out and searching for those sponsorships, especially ahead of the Olympics and big stage events like that. So I'm passing it off to whomever wants to take the first stab at it.
How about the industry veteran? How about Leigh?
We did an NFT event yesterday with Patrick Mahomes, and we put up art, and it all sold out in about 25 minutes, and he raised $3 million. So I think the key to all this is brand. How many people out of 1,000 can name a particular athlete? And if they can they put an appellation to it? Can they put adjectives which identify that person? Do they have popularity, a high Q factor? And once you've empowered an athlete by putting that together, then it can take you in so many different directions. So brand is everything. We start branding by having our athletes go back to the high school community that helped shape them, to the collegiate community, and to the professional community, and set up charitable programs that enhance the quality of life. So once you've introduced yourself in a positive way to people by a scholarship fund or a charitable foundation, that starts to help you build brand. And then once you have the brand, the question is, where can that take you? So years ago, when Brian Boitano came back from the Olympics, we decided he should own the skate show with Katarina Witt. They should be owners rather than just talent. And Troy Aikman had tremendous brand in Dallas, so he could have Troy Aikman's Auto Mall. So the question is, how many creative ancillary revenue flows can you build from this? The NFTs are new. It's a new concept. It's like, are we going to sell air? You're selling something that's digital. So you have to have people who are savvy in that space, and there's the interconnection with Bitcoin. But the whole key to everything is branding an athlete and then empowering them, so that 3 of our former football players are now minority owners of teams. And someone like Patrick Mahomes not only owns part of the Kansas City Royal baseball team. So the question is, once you have established that brand, you can take it in a lot of directions. Years ago, we established something called Athlete Direct. And I put together a company that put Michael Jordan, Ken Griffey Jr., and the football quarterbacks up on AOL in the early days of the internet. And you could reach out to them directly, and they could market directly. You could buy from them with an e-commerce application. So the only limitation here is the creativity, but you have to start with an identifiable athlete that performs well in critical situations when people are watching, combined with an appealing personality.
So Leigh, I'd love to kind of follow up on that and then obviously open it up to Natalie and Tracy, because I feel like they have a lot to say on this as well. When do you think an athlete should start thinking about their brand? Is it in high school before they get to NCAA? Is it during college? When do you think that process should start?
So if you believe that the currency today in the market is how many followers do you have on Twitter, how many followers do you have on Instagram, and all the rest of it, there's no starting point that's too early. So, given the, I don't really understand TikTok and why that's appealing, but but obviously a lot of people do. And but the point is, you can build that brand early. And now we have SB 206 in California, which then got the NCAA going, that said you can name, image, and likeness can be parlayed by a marketing agent as soon as the player hits campus. So people had thought, well, this will be football quarterbacks. If you think of someone that at a big program that plays on national TV, football quarterbacks, but it could also be a female athlete heading for the Olympics on a college campus. It could also be someone who's into gymnastics or swimming or any multiple things. So the time to start branding is as early as possible. There are kids in high school now who are setting up their brand. Do you have content from an athlete that is compelling? Do you have a way to attract attention, or do you have some creative way to make this person unique? And can you distinguish them from every other person in the world? But you could start that process while someone's a high school athlete who's a skater, who's any sport really, and we start early. What's going to happen is that in football and basketball on college campuses, these people are going to market themselves, and they'll have marketing representatives, and that's going to be legal within the NCAA rules. So the earlier, the better, as soon as you have something substantive to say or stylistically to present in a unique way.
Great. Tracy, Natalie?
I'll let the athlete take that one.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what Leigh just said. I think what's cool in the NFT space is it is empowering athletes to go direct to fans. And I think anything that is allowing athletes to go direct to fans is extremely beneficial for athlete empowerment. And especially when it comes to female athletes who, we see 4% of sports media going to female athletes. But we know that there is a larger market than 4% for female athlete and women in sport content. So athletes are now with TikTok, and then even if female athletes can start getting on NFTs to grow their brand and monetize in a more straightforward way, direct to the consumer. And when it comes to starting early, I agree with what Leigh said of starting as early as possible. I know even when I was probably 15, my dad sat me down and walked me through, you need to learn about some of these things that are going to come up, because the earlier you can educate yourself, then the more prepared you'll be when it actually comes time. And especially if you're walking into a college campus and you're not ready for that conversation with an agent or for the monetization or the name, image, likeness, you have no idea how to brand yourself, you're going to be very far behind the athletes who've been able to start early.
Yeah, I would just echo all of that, but I think that, as Leigh said, content is important. Who you are, what you stand for is all part of your brand. And that is from inception, right? So you really have to be able to identify and understand what your outward appeal is. If that's in things that you drive purpose on. I don't know that you have to be a TikToker in order to drive value for things like NFTs, but yeah, those conversations that are going directly from athletes to fans are super important. Anyone's, I would just say that, there's some shiny object cautionary tales that we're not sure exactly, does jumping into an NFT, is that the end all be all? If that's what you're working towards, what is that actual return on your investment of doing that, and just making sure you're making that calculated risk reward decision.
100%. Andre, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so if you can see my wheels turning up here. So I think I'm going to play bad cop. Right? We're going to play a little bit of good cop, bad cop. All right, I'll be bad cop today. All right, so here we go. So with like branding in terms of like high schoolers, you know, I get it, right? Like I get it for the monetization factor of it, but is it just good for a kid's mind to be thinking about this stuff that early? Right, like we're asking these kids to make real deal adult decisions about their future and about their brand strategy, or even to have somebody develop it for them. And that's like really early when they're just trying to figure out who the heck they are, right? Like, so I think about that, and that scares me. Just from a former player, from an athlete, that scares me a lot. But one thing I do like about these NFTs now, like, so for these athletes, these high schoolers or whoever, you know, even though there's a lot of footage out there about that they can get, you know, they're always on footage. Why I like the idea of like, look, you know, they can create these super private footages, like super private. And like, so instead of having like the masses or the main media people have access to these video clips, like make these their own ones that are like legitimately two people in a room. And now they can have direct like capitalization on that, and they can do whatever they want with it, and they have all the control over that. So that's what I like about the NFTs, especially like, you know, high school, you know, like just think about if you can get a clip from a Zion in high school practicing or whatever, like that's really cool to me. So I look at both sides of it. NFTs to me, like I like them, I understand them, but in terms of having these athletes really be thinking about their brand strategy when they're just trying to figure out who they are in life, to me, that's scary just as on a whole personal level.
So can I kind of pick your brain a little bit more on this now that, you know, I think Tracy hinted at it a little bit and so did Natalie. The NCAA obviously is having some rules come out about the NIL, right? About players then able to profit on their name, likeness, what have you. So how do you think that then factors into this decision of, you know, hey, they are a high school student, but they're going into college, but maybe, you know, instead of Barstool or whomever putting out a sweatshirt with their face on it, they can then get the proceeds, or it can be held for them until they're done with the NCAA to then start their career in whatever you want to kind of see it as in terms of entrepreneurship.
Yeah, you know, I'm all for it, especially like if things are structured correctly. But you know, the thing is, like, if there's a good team around an athlete, and it's going to go back to like, you know, what player can afford the best team around though going into college. And then it kind of gets like this, you know, there's going to be one good and one bad, but there's like a lot of, you know, not so good people who just want to capitalize on that. And as a kid, like they don't know this stuff. And a lot of the parents, they don't know this stuff. They're just going to go with whoever feels like they can make them the most money. And so like, yes, do I think that it's a good thing that these high school or college athletes now can capitalize on their name and image likeness? Yeah, I think it's a great thing. It's just, man, I just want some safeguards around it to where like not any and everybody can just be clawing at these guys and girls in order to mooch off of them, because there's a lot of that already. That's just the part that scares me, just from a humanistic level.
Hey, Bianca, I'm just going to jump in real quick because I had this question about the human part, and I wanted to jump to Leigh about that because that's a question that we have in the Q&A right now. Anna Wild asked kind of the same question about like, and Leigh, I want to maybe ask you the same question about like, how do you feel about those athletes that have to establish their brand really early in life, and how do you kind of bridge their own like personal evolution and with that kind of like establishing that new brand like in high school or stuff like that? So Leigh, can you maybe jump on that from the question from Anna Wild? Thanks, Anna.
So I think everything in life at the end of the day is about values and shared values and prioritization, so that listening skills are key. So if I'm talking to a young athlete, I'm trying to understand how they view family and geographical location and profile and making a difference in the world and short-term economic gain and long-term economic security and being a starter on a team and being on a winning team, and what is critical to that young person. Because we're looking at personality development. And so we will only take someone that's got a good and giving heart, wants to be a role model, understands the power that sports can bring to targeting different situations in the world. And then it's understanding that person. Now, ideally, we'd like everyone to have a pristine childhood, a great maturation cycle, and to be firmly rooted and grounded when they approach the experience. But the truth is, they're out there being identified at 10 or 12 years old in certain sports, and they're already dedicating their life to the sport. And it's not as if we're pushing people into using the internet and they're sitting in front of that computer using it all the time. Their skills are amazing. I was sitting on a plane next to someone with a 3-year-old, and that person was working an iPad better than I could ever do. And so we're raising a generation that's already skilled, that understands social media, that communicates in this manner anyway. And so, but I do agent academies. So we do teaching for young agents and young sports career professionals across the country. And we have people as young as 13 that come to these sessions because they're already mature and already doing those things. Helping an athlete balance good values, a love for the sport, and a good home life, and the rest of it is part of what we have to do. And it's allowing them that balance. But as to and these are bright young kids, but remember, when you're talking about someone that age, they still have their parents involved in the mix. So you're not simply dealing with an athlete one-on-one. Every time I talk to a young person, it's with their parents. So when I was marketing Carrie Strug, the female gymnast who years ago stuck the vault at the Olympics with a broken leg, I was talking to her parents, a doctor, and they were asking those questions. So they're doing due diligence into who's representing them. And certain sports have players associations that will help younger people too. So there's all sorts of scrutiny that can go on where you don't have exploitation.
Leigh, just to piggyback off of that, into Andre's point as well a little bit, we're talking about teams that support groups of individuals that support personal development, the people around them, how they're raising that brand, and then ultimately creating it into a brand that can grow and process and things like that. Natalie, I'd love to pass it to you as an ex-athlete as well. What do you think were important lessons that you learned, and who are the people that you kind of trusted the most in your circle as you're creating an athlete, as you're creating a brand? Who are you looking to for guidance, and what kind of kept you going and grounded at the same time?
Yeah. So mostly my parents. Like Leigh said, I think when I was younger, it really came down to my parents. I remember my dad sitting me down and talking me through even how news articles work and how they might take a certain quote of what you said. So be mindful of the things that you said. He bought me books. I was reading and researching everything. Unfortunately, back then, there wasn't as much knowledge as there is now. And so I think it does come down to the parents and education. And it still blows my mind that actually in elementary schools and high schools, there isn't a social media course yet. When we see how big a role it plays in everyone's daily life, I think it would be beneficial for anyone, athletes or not, to have some knowledge about how to use some of these tools. Because we are seeing now, I think there was a recent article that came out saying that high school athletes, the number one career, or high schoolers, sorry, not just athletes, the number one career that they're looking forward to is YouTuber. That's the most coveted career. So it's a whole new generation of athlete and teenager. They're very aware of social media. They're far ahead of what we were at, where I was at. I think Instagram came out when I was starting my snowboard career, so I had to learn the whole platform from the very start, and I didn't really have anyone to look up to. So now I think it's important that those other athletes can go back and help those younger athletes, but we are seeing a much more knowledgeable and educated younger athlete, especially when it comes to social media and branding and things like that.
Hey, Bianca, just before you go on with your next question, just to make sure every panelist, maybe it's just me, but I have like a feedback right now when Natalie was talking. So make sure you close your mic so we actually don't have the feedback from your computer. All right, back to you, Bianca.
Perfect. I'm gonna check this to Andre then. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so with all of this, and somebody said in the chat, about they talk about the kids who don't have the best guidance at home, and I was watching this. You talking about YouTubers, and I was watching. I think it was Jake Paul or Logan Paul, one of those Paul brothers. Yeah, I can't remember. So anyway, but they were talking about boxing, right? And you know how he can potentially make a bunch of money, boxing, and he's not a real boxer, or what they say. And they asked him if he's bad for the sport or good for the sport. And so what he said, well, look, growing up, I was on Disney, then I became a YouTuber, and I got all this fame or whatnot. And he said, I was just so empty because I had so much fame, I had so much money, but I had no direction. And he said, the sport of boxing helped him have a passion, purpose for life. And so he said, he's good for boxing because why? Because now other kids, other individuals want to get into boxing because of him. And so now that I hear everybody talking, I'm like, okay, you know what? Even though I'm thinking about the mental health of all kids, well, we're talking about athletes here. And athletes really usually have a single-minded focused direction that is not just they're trying to be YouTubers, famous just for famous sake, but it's really about their whole individual sport as well. So I do agree with a lot of people are saying is that, you know what, since these kids or young adults or whatever you want to call them, have this direction, but at the same time, I guess the parent in me, right? Like I'm a parent of two kids. Parent of me just can see the dangers that can happen with being too famous and working on your brand and trying to be an adult too early. And that's the thing that just scares me at the end of the day. I mean, do I still think it's good? Yeah, I think it's good when done correctly. But just like everything else, there can be some side effects to it as well. So that's that.
Well, can we take boxing for a second? So I represented Oscar De La Hoya and Lennox Lewis. And the whole question was, how could they be role models for younger boxers? So what I said to Oscar De La Hoya is, you can be your own promoter. You just need to have a venue, the boxing, you need ranking, you need a television contract, but you can be your own promoter and you can empower younger boxers to understand that they can take control of their own lives. So Oscar set up Golden Boy Productions and Lennox set up Lion Productions. So you can utilize athletes' power to do all sorts of things. So, for example, we do these charitable programs. Work Done just put the 175th single mother and her family into the first home they'll ever own by making a down payment. With Lennox Lewis, we had him do a public service announcement that said, real men don't hit women. And that could do more to change behavioral attitudes in young rebellious adolescents than 1,000 authority figures ever could. So we have tremendous power here. So we've talked about monetization, but this summer, a number of our athletes took a stand on bad police shootings and better conditions in the inner cities. And they expressed themselves and they stood up, and they can change the arc. They can leave a legacy. When it comes to monetization, I'm writing a book called Parenting Youth Athletes. Because if you think about it, no one gives a parent a driver's license when their kid turns 5 and goes out and plays soccer. Are they supposed to win at all costs, or is empowerment, or is participation the key? And if they're not starting, if they're not playing a good position, if they don't like the coach, do you tell them assert yourself and stand up for yourself, or do you tell them life has these reverses, you got to learn character and sort of suck it up? So the point is, we can talk about the whole culture of youth sports and what values it's teaching, and we can focus on the maturation and development of young people. But when they get to the point where I meet them, which is generally when they're in their last years of college, they're already focused on how to do these things. So we're trying to create models where you have athletes who are inherently understand what a NFT is and how to utilize that. But none of this takes the place of good character development. And they have now on college campuses classes for athletes that teach them everything from how to use a sport. Here's what we tell athletes: if you can master the athletic skills, you'll be a success in anything, right? If you understand self-discipline, postponing current gratification for future success, teamwork, mastering bodies of information for implementation in real time, courage and performance under pressure and adversity, then you can go own a company. So Duran Cherry owns the Anheuser-Busch distributorship in Kansas City. So we're preparing these athletes for second career. We're preparing them, can they be a broadcaster? Can they be a coach? Can they be a teacher? What can they do? So everything in this is about a holistic approach to making sure that an athlete is happy and has good values over life.
Hey, I'm gonna shoot a curveball actually to Tracy, because I'm seeing right now the some question in the Q&A. So thanks for everyone who asking question. Tracy, I know with TPI you work on a couple of stuff right now, but how do you feel that the ownership of group athletes, the athletes that want to have ownership of professional sports team? How do you feel about that for the lower tier or mid-tier athletes? Because we hear a lot on ESPN about now it's LeBron James just had and stuff like that. But what about those middle of the pack or lower tier person? That's what the question in
the Yeah, no, thanks. That's exactly what we do around ventures, generally speaking, is democratize the opportunities. I think Leigh said it earlier. Someone said about the 99 percenters, right? There's the 1%ers who have the teams around them are doing that, but there's a whole lot of other athletes out there that don't have those teams, that haven't had the super agents work with them so that they know that the brand is there, and they don't have the financial education and or the liquidity to do some of the things. It's important that we're bringing these opportunities downstream, not only to the athletes that have the biggest followers that are getting. Actually, now it's an interesting dynamic between getting bigger contracts at teams if they have bigger followers, right? And I'll let Leigh speak to that better than I. But ownership of not only, and that's where we focus on empowerment of the individual, right? Your team can be great. Your team around you can be wonderfully brilliant. But if they leave tomorrow because you've gotten into an accident and can no longer play, and your value to some of those folks goes down, right? And so how do we empower that individual to know what they need to know to be in business, whether they're entrepreneurial and building their own businesses, and or things like getting access to team ownership and other great opportunities? It's important.
Yeah, with your work with the player impact, what do you find yourself discussing most with athletes in terms of that, in terms of next steps, in terms of understanding their brand, their worth, their fight? What do you find yourself talking about most?
I think it's that. So we see the athlete, I think, for a lot of them in a very more vulnerable position than they're used to, right? I don't know what a term sheet is. I don't know what evaluation means. And so giving them that education around that in an environment that is safe for them to ask those questions, because it is amongst other high achieving, like-minded individuals. So we're just discussing that. Again, we meet the athlete where they are in their journey. If they're not ready to invest and they need a bit of time, giving them that sort of more experiential learning opportunities to get there. So we discuss vulnerability. Yeah. And knowing that, you need to ask the questions to empower yourself.
Natalie and Andre, this is definitely something that I love that Tracy brought up, because there were so many questions I wish I could have asked throughout my career. Looking back now, what are maybe one or two things that you wish you would have known about this process, about your brand, about kind of going about all of it?
Personally, I wish I would have shared more of the lows and not just the highs. And that's something that I educate athletes on a lot more now. The things that I was going through with mental health, with, not performing as well as I thought I could have, not making the Olympics and falling a couple spots short, things like those, I just skipped over. And, everything was rosy on the outside. And if you look at my social media now, it's completely different. And I think, we've seen that big shift, especially in 2020, where people are more vulnerable. And we're seeing it make a large impact. Like having these athletes speak up about what they care about is extremely important. And I think, building personal brand, the leverage that you can do on just creating an impact, like where else, especially for athletes who might not be televised to the same level of like a Patrick Mahomes, can they go direct to 100,000 people and share their message? The other day I posted a video about women in sport and it reached 150,000 people. Where else would I have that direct connection to be able to get that audience there? So I think I wish that I would have shared more of, the behind the scenes life of being an athlete, because it probably could have helped other people who were struggling with the same things. So that's probably the biggest one for me.
Yeah, similar to me, I think what I would have wished that I'd known while I was playing. So I wore number 96, right? All right. So I wish I would have known that 96 did not make Andre Fluellen. Andre Fluellen made number 96. All right. Because we get so wrapped up in that name and that uniform logo. And we think that that is what created us. And it was me that created number 96. I wore that throughout my entire career pretty much. And so I wish I would have known that. I wish I had known the personal value that I brought to the team instead of me thinking that the team brought me value. And, number two, I wish I wouldn't have been so focused on how much I made over my career. I wish I wouldn't have been focused on money. I say it like this. For some people, and I know this is going to sound weird, some, that whole, 70% of the NFL players or athletes, whatever, after 5 years or within 5 years of them playing. Like for some people, for some athletes, that's not a bad thing. And I'll be honest, because a lot of time I've just seen it so many times that guys can hide so many of the issues behind how much they've made. It's like I say, it's like having good barbecue sauce on bad ribs. All right, like you can kind of cover it up a little bit, but man, it's just inside, man. They're just under that nasty, that they got nasty meat under that barbecue sauce, but inside they're literally like dying. And I've seen it so many times. And so I wish I wouldn't have been as focused on okay, what can I do for this game? How much money am I going to make? And I wish I'd have been focused on or had somebody help me focus on who am I? Because that's the question that athletes always ask when they're done playing. Who am I? What is my value to the world? What can I bring to society? I don't know about a term sheet. I don't know about a P&L. I don't know about this stuff. So what value can I bring to the world? And that's I wish that there was some training. I wish I had known more about that while I was there.
Andre, that was so beautifully said. I kind of just want to keep that moment for me. This would be an NFT moment. But as Dom pointed out, we're kind of getting to the end of this, but something I want to ask everyone on the panel. We are talking about, mental health, understanding our worth, not only as an athlete, but as an individual and what that platform brings. How important do you think it is for people to open up, athletes specifically, on both sides of the coin, on, making that amazing dunk, but also potentially, pulling kind of what Kyrie Irving did, and taking some space away to recoup, become that person so they can perform at their best athletically, mentally, and emotionally?
I'll start, I guess. I mean, I believe in the mind-body connection, right? And that vulnerability again. It's what your mind has to be healthy. You have to be healthy, both mentally and physically, to go out and do what you put out there as your product as an athlete. I think that if you need the space, there should be no expectation that you have to use your platform or be a brand in order to capitalize on who you are. As Andre said, knowing who you are is the most important thing you can do. And what you want to do with that shouldn't be dictated by what other people tell you have to do in order to commercialize and to make that money, right? And that's where I go back to purpose and vulnerability and making sure you are starting with yourself.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, for example, when I said that one of my regrets is wishing I'd opened up about those things earlier, is that I probably couldn't. I had the self-awareness at the time, knowing that I was still going through it. And now in reflection, I can. And so I think athletes knowing, spending more of that time on their inner work, and they probably see it, Kyrie, and that inspires them to open up privately. And if they do want it in choice, open up publicly and make that sort of impact later on, then they could feel free to, but having that decision. But seeing some people who are able to then open up really does change the conversation for the younger athletes looking up, but even their peers who realize, hey, I've been going through this as well. Maybe I can go and seek help or spark a conversation.
So I think the key to helping athletes, as I said, is listening skills. So if Andre had been my client, I would have sat with him and asked him, who are you? What's important to you? What happens if you break your leg tomorrow? What other fields in the world interest you? How can we prepare you for a long life of fulfillment? I want you to be reflective and look into yourself and think about these values and what's most important to you. How important is family? How important is spiritual values? How important is geographical location, being in a certain region? How important are all these things? Think about this now, because you're going to be in a world of where you're going to have to produce tremendously, but give this some thought now. So if I've captured that, if I have that, if I can get into the heart and mind of an athlete and see the world the way they see it, and understand their deepest anxieties and fears and their greatest hopes and dreams, then I'm representing a human being who happens to have athletic skills. And that human being has a long life arc, and we have to plan for the entire part of it, because I have a lot of clients in football and career-ending injury. So you have to be ready at any moment to make a smooth transition. So we're using the off season for this young player to intern at a coffee bean, and this young player to be involved in setting up its own charitable foundation and learning those life skills of how to have a goal and achieve it. And it's not just the Patrick Mahomes. It's the last player on our roster is learning these skills, so that my job's complete if I have someone that has once they leave sports, has a good family relationship, balanced mental health, goals, and can smoothly transition into what they're going to do next. And so a lot of it's listening and challenging the athlete to do some thinking about these issues and what really is important to them in life, and to make sure that we're approaching it from their greatest hopes and fulfillment, and to stimulate the best in them and help them find their truest self.
Hey, thanks, Leigh. We're gonna start with part one on this wise words. I love it. So, Natalie, just before I put you in the audience, there's some question out there I think you should answer in the Q&A. Deborah actually asking some really good question. I think, like, knowing you a little bit and I know Malcolm actually in the audience answering some stuff. You should go in the audience right now and just answer in the Q&A, because some of the stuff are going to be right there for you in your alley. Tracy, was a pleasure having you today. Andre, again, keep up the good work, man. You're amazing. You always put some NFT moment in our panel, so I love it. All right. So I'm gonna put you in the audience right now. Thanks so much, and we're gonna bring Leigh. We're gonna keep you in as a wise man today, and we're gonna Jack, Rob, and Joe in about 30 seconds. All right. I'm just gonna find them in the audience. All right. See you, Natalie. See you, Tracy. See you.
Thank you.